It was late October. The air was crisp, carrying the sharp scent of pine needles and damp earth. 5 friends had piled into a heavy-duty SUV, leaving the concrete and noise of the city behind for a week of off-grid camping. There was Mark and Emily, high school sweethearts who thrived on adventure, Jake and Sarah, who were just looking for a break from their grueling corporate jobs, and Leo. Leo was the 5th wheel, single, fiercely observant, and the one who had mapped out this obscure, miles-deep trail. The drive was filled with the usual banter, the radio playing loud until the signal died completely, replaced by the relentless crunch of gravel beneath the tires. As they ventured deeper, the road narrowed, flanked by ancient, towering oaks that seemed to lean inward, clawing at the sky. When they finally reached the coordinates Leo had marked, the mood in the car shifted. The joking stopped. They stepped out into a clearing, but it wasn't empty. There, nestled against the tree line, was an abandoned campsite. A large canvas tent lay half-collapsed, its fabric violently shredded. A heavy-duty cooler had been dragged into the dirt, its thick plastic casing torn open as if by something with immense, jagged strength. Half-eaten, rotting food was scattered across the damp soil, swarming with flies. Maybe a bear, Jake offered, his voice lacking its usual confidence. He forced a laugh. Guess they packed up in a hurry. But Leo wasn't looking at the torn tent. He was kneeling by the fire pit. The ashes were cold, washed out by recent rain, but caught on a jagged rock nearby was a piece of fabric. A torn, bloody scrap of a flannel shirt. Emily crossed her arms, shivering despite her heavy jacket. I don't like this. We should turn back. There are 100 other spots we passed on the way up. We just drove 6 hours, Mark argued, clapping his hands together to break the tension. It's a bear, Em. We have bear mace. We have the rifle in the trunk. We'll set up on the other side of the clearing. It's fine. Sarah reluctantly agreed with Mark, not wanting to ruin the trip. But Leo stood up, his eyes scanning the perimeter. Through a dense thicket of dead birch trees, about half a mile up a gradual incline, he saw it. A cabin. Small, weathered, and bleeding, a thin trail of gray smoke from a crooked stone chimney. We're not alone out here, Leo muttered. Against Emily's protests, they pitched their tents on the far side of the clearing, keeping their backs to the SUV. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and black, Leo decided to head up to the cabin. He wanted to ask about the ruined campsite. He wanted assurance. The walk up the hill felt strangely oppressive. The woods were entirely dead. No birds called. No insects hummed. Just the crunch of his own boots. When he reached the porch, he noticed the windows were thick with grime, the wooden boards scarred with deep, vertical gouges. Leo knocked, 3 heavy raps. Silence. He knocked again. Hello, we're camping down in the clearing. The heavy wooden door cracked open, just an inch. Through the sliver of darkness, a single, pale blue eye stared out at him. It belonged to an old man, his face a map of deep wrinkles, a wild gray beard blending into the shadows of the room. "Leave," a voice rasped. It sounded like dry leaves grinding over stone. "Look, I just wanted to ask about the site down there." I said, "Leave, before the sun drops. Get in your car and do not come back." The door slammed shut, and the heavy thud of a deadbolt echoed into the twilight. Leo returned to the camp, deeply unsettled. He relayed the interaction, but Jake just rolled his eyes. Crazy hermit. Exactly the kind of guy who lives in the woods. Let's just keep to ourselves. Night fell like a heavy curtain. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows against the trees, but the warmth did nothing to ease the creeping dread. Sarah and Emily stayed close to the flames, their eyes darting at every snapping twig. Jake and Mark drank beer, trying to force a light-hearted atmosphere, but Leo couldn't relax. He sat on a cooler, his gaze fixed on the pitch-black woods in the direction of the cabin. "Did you guys hear that?" Emily whispered suddenly, gripping Mark's arm. The fire popped. Outside the ring of light, there was a sound. It wasn't the heavy, clumsy crashing of a bear. It was rhythmic, deliberate. The soft pad of something massive walking on two legs, circling the perimeter of their camp just beyond the tree line. "Who's out there?" Mark yelled, standing up, trying to sound imposing. The footsteps stopped immediately. A heavy, guttural exhalation of air, like a deep sigh from a massive set of lungs, echoed from the darkness. Then the smell hit them. It was a vile, coppery stench of wet fur, rotting meat, and old blood. Sarah gagged, covering her mouth. The five of them huddled together, the rifle now in Mark's trembling hands. They stayed awake the entire night, jumping at shadows. But whatever was out, there never crossed into the light. When morning finally broke, pale and gray, the tension snapped into open argument. "We're leaving." "Now," Emily demanded, packing her bag with frantic, shaking hands. "Agreed," Jake said, his bravado entirely gone. But Leo was staring up the hill again. "That old man knows what's out here. He warned us. I'm going back up there. I need to know what we're dealing with before we try to drive out. If it's a person messing with us, they could have trapped the road before anyone could stop him." Leo grabbed a heavy maglite and marched into the trees. He never made it to the cabin. 10 minutes after Leo left, a scream tore through the forest. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, a wet, tearing shriek that silenced the wind. Then, a heavy thud, followed by the sickening sound of snapping bone. "Leo," Mark screamed, grabbing the rifle and sprinting toward the trees, Jake right behind him. They found the flashlight dropped in the dirt, still on, its beam illuminating a horrific scene. A thick spray of crimson painted the bark of a nearby oak tree. Deep drag marks tore through the moss, leading deeper into the impenetrable brush. Leo was gone. Blind panic took over. Mark and Jake sprinted back to the clearing, screaming at the girls. "Get in the car. Get in the goddamn car." They scrambled toward the SUV, slamming the doors shut, trembling violently. Jake jammed the keys into the ignition and twisted. The engine sputtered, but the car didn't move. He hit the gas. The engine roared, but the chassis just shuddered. Mark threw open his door and looked down. All 4 heavy tread tires hadn't just been slashed, they had been ripped entirely from the rims. Huge chunks of rubber were scattered across the dirt. He looked at the hood. A massive indentation, shaped like an enormous, clawed hand, was crushed deep into the metal, right over the engine block. Oil was bleeding into the soil. They were trapped. "Oh God, oh God, oh God," Sarah sobbed, pulling her knees to her chest. Suddenly, a loud thump hit the rear window. The girls screamed. Standing behind the vehicle was the old man. He looked terrible, his face pale. A battered double-barrel shotgun resting in his trembling hands. "Get out," he barked, his voice raw. "If you stay in this metal box, it'll peel it open like a tin can. Follow me. Run." Having no other choice, the 4 survivors scrambled out of the ruined SUV and followed the old man, sprinting up the agonizingly steep hill toward the cabin. Behind them, they heard a roar, a sound that defied nature. It was half wolf, half human, filled with a terrifying, malicious rage. They burst into the cabin, the old man slamming the heavy oak door and throwing 3 massive iron deadbolts. He pushed a heavy cast-iron stove against the wood. The inside of the cabin was a fortress. Silver crosses hung over every window. The air smelled thick of sage and gunpowder. Emily collapsed on the floor, weeping hysterically. "Where is Leo? What took him?" The old man slumped into a rocking chair, staring at the floorboards, looking 100 years old. "Your friend is dead, and you will be too if we don't get you out of here." "What is out there?" Mark demanded, pointing a shaking finger at the door. Was it a bear? Was it a person? The old man looked up, his pale blue eyes brimming with a profound, crushing sorrow. "It's my son," he whispered. The room went dead silent. "His name is Silas," the old man continued, his voice trembling. 10 years ago, he was tracking a wounded buck deep in the eastern ridge. He didn't find the buck. He found something else. A beast, sick and dying, ancient and cursed. It bit him before he drove his hunting knife through its skull. He thought it was just a wolf. He thought he was lucky to survive. The old man choked back a sob. But the sickness, the curse, it passed into him. On the first full moon, he didn't just change. He lost his soul. My wife, my beautiful Martha. She wouldn't let me tie him down. She said a mother's love could reach him. She thought she could calm the monster. He closed his eyes, tears spilling down his weathered cheeks. It tore her apart. He killed his own mother in this very room, and then he broke through that window and fled into the dark. I've stayed here ever since, guarding this road, turning people away. I couldn't bring myself to hunt him down, but I couldn't let him hurt anyone else. A massive, hairy fist the size of a cinder block shattered the glass of the front window, bending the iron bars inward. The cabin shook violently as something threw its immense weight against the door. The wood splintered. "He knows you're here," the old man yelled over the deafening roar of the beast outside. He reached into his pocket and threw a set of heavy brass keys to Jake. "Around the back. There's an old F-150 under a tarp. It's got a full tank. Go, now." "What about you?" Jake yelled. "I'm finishing what I should have done 10 years ago," the old man roared, racking his shotgun. The four friends didn't hesitate. They fled through the heavy reinforced back door, tearing the tarp off the rusted, beat-up pickup truck. They piled in, Jake in the driver's seat. Just as the engine roared to life, the front of the cabin exploded outward. Standing in the wreckage was a nightmare. A towering 8-foot-tall monstrosity of matted black fur, elongated limbs, and a jaw dripping with saliva and gore. Its eyes weren't the yellow of a wolf's. They were pale blue, human eyes trapped in the skull of a demon. Before Jake could shift into gear, the beast lunged. It didn't go for the truck. It turned and grabbed the old man, lifting him effortlessly by his throat. With a sickening crunch, it hurled the old man through the air like a rag doll. He slammed into the trunk of a massive pine tree and crumpled to the ground, motionless. "Drive, drive," Mark screamed. Jake slammed the gas pedal. The truck tore down the dirt path, tires spinning wildly in the mud. They hit the main logging road, the suspension screaming as they bounced over deep ruts in the dark. For 2 minutes, there was nothing but the roar of the engine and their own panicked breathing. Then a massive thud rocked the bed of the truck. Sarah shrieked. The beast was in the back. A monstrous, clawed hand smashed through the rear windshield, raining glass over Emily and Sarah. The werewolf let out a deafening roar, its foul breath filling the cab. It grabbed the roof of the truck, its immense weight lifting the back tires off the ground. The truck swerved violently, fishtailing toward the edge of a steep ravine. Jake lost control. The truck slammed sideways into an embankment, the engine stalling with a horrific grind of metal. They were dead in the water. The beast slowly pulled itself over the cab, landing heavily on the hood. The metal buckled under its weight. It leaned down, staring directly through the windshield at Jake. Its pale blue eyes were entirely devoid of humanity. It raised a massive, clawed fist, ready to smash through the glass and drag them out into the night. The beast froze. A high-pitched, agonizing whine escaped its throat. The monstrous creature slumped forward, its massive claws sliding uselessly down the cracked windshield. Then, slowly, it rolled off the hood and hit the dirt road with a heavy, wet thud. The four of them sat frozen, gasping for air. Through the cracked windshield, illuminated by the headlights of the ruined truck, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was the old man. He was dragging his right leg, clutching his chest, where dark blood poured freely. In his hands, he held an old, antique lever-action rifle. Smoke drifted lazily from the barrel. Slowly, terrifyingly, the massive beast on the ground began to change. The sickening sound of bones snapping and reforming echoed in the quiet night. The thick black fur receded. The elongated limbs shrank. Within moments, lying in the dirt, bathed in the harsh light of the headlamps, was a naked, emaciated man in his mid-30s. A deep, fatal gunshot wound pierced directly through his heart. A silver bullet. The old man dropped the rifle. He collapsed to his knees beside his son. Silas gasped for air, blood bubbling at his lips. He looked up at his father, the madness completely gone from his pale blue eyes. For the first time in 10 years, he was himself. Silas reached out a trembling hand. The old man took it, burying his face in his son's shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. Through the glass, the survivors heard the son's final, rattling breath. "I'm sorry, Dad," Silas whispered. The young man's eyes glazed over. He was gone. The old man didn't move. He just held his son, his own breathing growing incredibly shallow. The injuries he sustained when the beast threw him were too severe. He looked up at the truck one last time, gave a slow, exhausted nod to Jake, and then rested his forehead against his son's chest. Slowly, the old man closed his eyes, and his chest stopped moving. Father and son, dead in the dirt, finally at peace. When the sun finally rose, a logging crew found the 4 survivors walking aimlessly down the mountain road, covered in glass and blood, completely catatonic. The police scoured the area. They found the ruined campsite. They found the pulverized SUV. They even found the burned-out shell of the cabin. But when they went to retrieve the bodies of the father and son, they found nothing. Just a massive pool of blood soaking into the eastern dirt, and a single, crushed silver bullet. Perhaps the forest reclaimed them. Or perhaps, in the deep, suffocating silence of the ancient woods, some curses never truly die.